Okay, let's dive in. We have a stack of material here that you've shared with us, all centered around a band whose story is quite remarkable.
That's right. We're going to unpack the journey of the British rock band Dire Straits. From what we have here, we want to understand how they formed, the development of their distinctive sound, the incredible height of their success, and the reasons why they ultimately decided to end the journey.
Right, and not just once, but twice, really.
Exactly. It's quite a story.
It really is. It seems to show how a unique musical vision, paired with, a bit of luck and timing, can lead to a global phenomenon.
But it also reveals the intense pressure and personal cost that can come with that level of fame.
Yeah, that seems to be a core theme running through this. It's a powerful arc, and we're excited to explore it with you.
Great. Let's start at the very beginning, back in 1977.
Okay, take us there. 1977, Deptford, southeast London. This is where the seeds of Dire Straits were planted, right?
That's the place. The core members brought together quite different backgrounds, actually. You had the brothers, Mark Knopfler, who would front the band on lead vocals and that distinctive lead guitar,
Mm-hmm.
and his brother, David Knopfler, on rhythm guitar and backing vocals. And interestingly, they were Glaswegian brothers, who then ended up down in London.
Okay, so Scottish roots there. And who else was in that initial lineup?
Joining them were John Ilsley on bass guitar and backing vocals, and Pick Withers on drums and percussion.
Right.
Ilsley and Withers hailed from the Midlands. So you have this mix of people converging on London from different parts of the UK.
It's interesting how bands form like that geographically and their day jobs at the time. They weren't all full-time musicians from the start, were they?
No, not at all. It's
Yeah.
pretty telling of their origins before music took over. Mark Knopfler was working as an English teacher.
An English teacher, wow.
John Ilsley was studying at Goldsmiths College. David Knopfler was a social worker.
Okay.
Now, contrast that with Pick Withers. He was already a seasoned professional drummer.
Ah, right.
The material says he had spent 10 years doing session work, was the house drummer at the famous Rockfield Studios for a while,
Oh, yeah, Rockfield.
and had been in a band called Spring that actually put out an album back in '71. So he brought a level of an industry experience the others hadn't yet accumulated.
That is an unconventional mix for a rock band that would become so huge. A teacher, a student, a social worker, and a pro drummer. Doesn't immediately scream, arena rock stars.
It really doesn't, does it?
Yeah.
And their early musical style also set them apart, especially in London in 1977.
Because that was peak punk rock time, wasn't it?
Exactly. While everyone else seemed to be playing fast, loud, angry music, Dire Straits was doing something very different. They were drawing from country, folk, the kind of laid-back blues rock of J.J. Cale,
J.J. Cale, yeah, you can hear that.
and even some jazz influences. Their sound was quite stripped down, very rootsy,
Like pub rock.
very much influenced by that pub rock scene,
Yeah.
which favored musicianship and songs over just raw aggression. It was quieter, more intricate, and really focused on Mark Knopfler's distinct fingerstyle guitar work.
So they stood out sonically. Now, before they were Dire Straits, there was another name.
There was, briefly, Cafe Racers.
Cafe Racers. Doesn't quite have the same ring to it, does it?
Not really. The story behind the name Dire Straits is a fun little anecdote from what we have here.
Okay.
It was supposedly coined by a musician flatmate of Pick Withers. They were apparently rehearsing in a friend's kitchen, Simon Cowell from the band Lindisfarne.
Oh, Lindisfarne, right.
And the name came up, whether it was, a comment on their financial situation at the time or maybe just the cramped rehearsal space, who knows, but it stuck.
Dire Straits, it definitely sounds more evocative. So the name is set, the sound is forming in that kitchen. How did they get from there to actually getting noticed?
Well, the crucial first step seemed to have been a demo tape. In 1977, they recorded a 5-song demo. And this tape included some tracks that would become absolutely central to their story. Songs like Sultans of Swing, Water of Love, and Down to the Waterline.
Wow, those are classics right from the start. Did they shop it around?
They did try. Their initial attempt to get signed didn't pan out, apparently. They took the tape to MCA in Soho, and they were turned down.
Ouch. MCA missed out there.
Big time. But the real turning point, according to the material, came kind of indirectly. It wasn't from aggressively trying to get signed.
No.
No, it was from sending a tape to Charlie Gillette. He was a well-respected BBC Radio London presenter, had a show called Honky Tonk,
Right, I know the name.
and they supposedly sent it to him, just looking for some feedback, maybe some advice, not necessarily expecting airplay.
And Gillette didn't just offer advice, did he?
No, He was so impressed, particularly with Sultans of Swing, that he played it on his show.
That must have been huge for them.
That radio play was the absolute catalyst. The material indicates that within just 2 months of that demo being aired on BBC Radio London, the band had signed a proper recording contract.
2 months. That's incredibly fast.
It really is. They signed with the Vertigo division of Phonogram Inc. Things moved very, very quickly after that initial radio exposure.
And they kept busy, too, didn't they? Recording more demos.
Yeah, later in '77, they recorded more demos for BBC Radio London. We see songs listed like Southbound Again, In the Gallery, Six Blade Knife, Setting Me Up, Eastbound Train, and Real Girl. So they were clearly building their repertoire quickly.
Definitely laying the groundwork. Then came the debut album itself.
Right, recorded in February 1978 at Basing Street Studios in Notting Hill, London.
And the cost? I saw a figure mentioned.
Yeah, remarkably modest, apparently.
Right.
£12,500 for what would become a massive global hit record.
Incredible. Muff Winwood produced it. Steve Winwood's brother.
That's the one.
Yeah.
It first came out in the UK on Vertigo, but the key, really, was getting it heard in the US.
How did that happen?
Well, that's where an A&R representative named Corinne Berg at Warner Bros. Records in New York City played a really crucial role.
Okay.
The material highlights that she heard the album and just had this strong conviction that its sound was exactly what audiences in America were looking for, even though, apparently, initially, only one other person in her department agreed with her.
Wow, she really championed it then.
She really did. It took her belief and push to get it picked up over there.
And the songs on that first album, they felt quite personal to Mark Knopfler's experiences, didn't they?
Yes, the material definitely points this out. Down to the Waterline, for example, drew from imagery of life up in Newcastle.
His hometown area.
Right, In the Gallery, was apparently a tribute to an artist he knew, a sculptor named Harry Phillips. Wild West End and Lions reflected his early days living in London. So, yeah, grounded in real places and people.
That gives them a certain authenticity. Once the album was out, things really took off when Sultans of Swing started charting in the UK, right?
Exactly. They began touring, first as an opening act for Talking Heads.
That's an interesting pairing, musically. Very different bands.
It is, isn't it? But that Warner Bros. Deal ensured the self-titled debut album was released worldwide before the end of 1978. And that's when its success truly went global.
How global are we talking?
Well, it topped the charts in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and eventually went top 10 in every single European country.
Every European country? That's a massive reach for a debut record from a relatively unknown band.
Huge. And their first North American tour in 1979 sounds incredibly intense. 51 sold-out concerts packed into just 38 days.
Wow, 51 shows in 38 days? That's relentless.
Imagine that schedule. A complete whirlwind introduction to a massive new audience across the continent.
And Sultans of Swing, that was a big one, wasn't it? The breakthrough hit.
Absolutely. It reached number 4 in the U.S. Billboard charts, number C it back home in the U.K. It just cemented itself as their signature song, the one they had to play at every show. A real fixture.
It perfectly captured that early sound, didn't it? That clean guitar, the storytelling.
It really did. And that success led to a pretty fascinating connection mentioned here. Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan, how did that happen?
Apparently, he saw the band play when they were in Los Angeles. He was impressed enough that he invited Mark Knopfler and Pick Withers to play on his album Slow Train Coming.
Playing on a Dylan album, that's quite an endorsement.
Absolutely. Getting that kind of validation from someone like Bob Dylan that early in your career, that's significant.
So in just, 2 years, they've gone from rehearsing in a kitchen to touring North America, having hit singles, and playing with a music legend.
An incredible trajectory. And they didn't waste any time. They immediately followed up with their second album, Communique.
Recorded pretty quickly after the debut success.
Yeah, seems like it. Recorded in December 1978, so very soon after the first one took off. They went to Compass Point Studios in Nassau, in the Bahamas, for this one.
Nice location.
And producers.
Jerry Wexler and Barry Beckett. Legends in their own right.
It was also very successful, wasn't it? Communique. It was. It hit number 1 in Germany. Apparently, while the debut album was still sitting there at number 3.
Wow.
And it peaked at number 5 in the UK charts. So, continued success.
And the sound, similar to the first album?
The material notes, it largely continued in that same vein, yeah. Though it does mention it showed Mark Knopfler's expanding lyrical scope, referencing the opening track, Once Upon a Time in the West.
Okay.
But it also hints that this approach, this sort of sound, was about to change. It sets the stage for their next phase, their musical evolution. The main single from Communique was Lady Writer.
Right. So these first two albums really established their sound and built them a substantial global following. But that hinted at change. That really started to take hold with the third album, didn't it?
It did, absolutely. As they moved into the 1980s, they picked up Grammy nominations in 1980, Best New Artist, and Best Rock Vocal Performance for Sultans of Swing. Recognition was growing.
Good momentum.
Then in July 1980, they began recording their third album, Making Movies.
And this is where the band experienced its first major lineup change, correct?
Yes, that's right. Tensions arose during the Making Movies sessions. It led to David Knopfler, Mark's brother, leaving the band to pursue a solo career.
That must have been difficult, especially with siblings involved.
Always is, yeah. A tough transition for any band, but particularly when it's family.
So the remaining members, Mark, John Illsley, Pick Withers, they had to finish the album as a trio.
Essentially, yeah, but with some help. The material mentions session musicians assisting. Specifically, Sid McGuinness played some rhythm guitar, although apparently he wasn't credited on the final album.
Okay.
And Roy Bittan, the keyboard player from Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band, guested on keyboards.
Roy Bittan, wow, that's interesting, adding keyboard.
Yeah, and that points towards the changing sound. After the album was actually finished, they brought in new full-time members for the touring.
Right, to flesh out the live sound.
Exactly. Keyboardist Alan Clark joined, and a guitarist from California named Hal Lindes. They joined for the On Location tour, which took them through Europe, North America, and Oceania.
So, adding a dedicated keyboard player, Alan Clark, that feels like a significant step in broadening their sound palette.
It really was. And Making Movies, which came out in October 1980, definitely showed this shift in direction.
How so?
Well, it was produced by Jimmy Iovine along with Mark Knopfler. The material indicates it got mostly positive reviews. Musically, it featured longer songs, more complex arrangements.
Ah, okay.
And this, we're told, became the template for the rest of the band's studio career. It was a key moment where they consciously moved into more intricate, perhaps more atmospheric musical territory.
And the songwriting? Still personal?
Very much so. The material mentions it featured many of Mark Knopfler's most personal songs, though sometimes presented under, fictitious names or narratives.
Got it. What were the key tracks from Making Movies?
Well, Romeo and Juliet became their biggest hit single from the album in the UK, reaching number 8. It's described as being about a failed love affair. A very poignant song.
Yeah, a classic.
Then there was Solid Rock. It didn't chart as a single, but it became an absolute staple of their live performances from that point forward. Real rocker.
Okay.
And perhaps the most iconic track from the album is the opener, Tunnel of Love.
That epic intro.
Yeah, the material specifically mentions its distinctive intro, which uses the carousel waltz from the musical Carousel.
Right, Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Exactly. The song was famously featured in the 1982 film An Officer and a Gentleman. As a single, it only reached no 54 in the UK back in 1981, but it's highlighted here as one of Dire Straits' most famous and enduring songs, and it immediately became a huge crowd pleaser live.
And the album itself did well over time.
Incredibly well, especially in the UK. It stayed in the UK albums chart for 5 years, eventually peaking at number 4.
5 years on the chart, that's amazing longevity.
It is. And it even made Rolling Stone magazine's list of the 100 best albums of the 80s later on, ranked at number 52.
So a real critical and commercial success that marked a significant evolution in their sound.
Definitely. And that evolution continued, perhaps even accelerated, with their 4th studio album, Love Over Gold, which came out in September 1982.
This is the one that really embraced those longer, more elaborate songs, right?
It certainly did. The material describes it as featuring lengthy musical passages. Alan Clark's piano and keyboard work became even more central to the overall sound on this record.
How was it received?
Very well, apparently. It went gold in America, and it topped the UK charts for 4 weeks. Strong performance.
And the title, Love Over Gold, where did that come from? It's quite poetic.
It has a unique origin mentioned in the material. It was inspired by some graffiti Mark Knopfler saw from his old council flat in London.
Just graffiti.
Yeah. But the phrase itself, Love Over Gold, was actually borrowed from the sleeve notes of an album by Captain Beefheart.
Ah, a nod to an influence there.
Seems like it, yeah. A little tribute.
And production-wise?
This was the first Dire Straits album produced solely by Mark Knopfler.
Okay, so taking full control in the studio.
It seems that way. Indicating his increasing control and, his clear vision for the band's direction at this point.
What were the main singles or key tracks from Love Over Gold?
The main chart hit in the UK was Private Investigations. This became their first ever UK top 5 single, reaching #2.
#2. That's impressive, especially, wasn't it quite a long song?
Very long, almost 7 minutes,
Mm.
which makes his chart success even more notable. It was another one that became a big live favorite.
But that wasn't the main single everywhere, was it?
No, the material notes that Industrial Disease was the primary single in other markets, particularly Canada, where it was a top 10 hit.
Industrial Disease. What was that one about?
The lyrics are quite specific, actually. They explore the decline of the British manufacturing industry in the early 80s, the strikes, the economic hardship, the general sense of depression and dysfunctionality. Quite topical for the time.
Interesting. Beyond the singles the album is known for.
The 14-minute epic Telegraph Road.
Right. A prime example of them moving into those really expansive, atmospheric pieces.
Absolutely. And another significant song from this period, though not actually on the album, is mentioned here. Private Dancer.
Oh, yeah, the Tina Turner song.
That's the one. It was written during this time, wasn't included on Love Over Gold, and was eventually given to Tina Turner. It became the title track of her massive comeback album.
Incredible story for that song. And Love Over Gold itself sold well from the start.
Exceptionally well. The material reports it sold 2 million copies in just the first 6 weeks after release.
Wow. Solid numbers, showing their growing global fan base was definitely sticking with them through this musical shift.
Definitely. However, shortly after the album was recorded, they had another lineup change. Drummer Pick Withers left the band.
Ah, the original drummer who replaced him.
He was replaced by Terry Williams, who is known for his work with bands like Rockpile, with Dave Edmunds and Nick Lowe.
Okay, another experienced drummer.
Yeah. So while Love Over Gold was still riding high on the charts, they actually released a 4-song EP. This was in January 1983.
An EP while the album was still current.
Yeah, called Extended Dance Play. Bit of an unusual move, maybe.
Did it do well?
It did. It actually gave them another hit single, Twisting by the Pool. That made the top 20 in both the UK and Canada. More upbeat, different feel.
And they were getting industry recognition around this time, too.
They were. They won Best British Group at the 1983 Brit Awards, so definitely cementing their status.
Then came the tour for Love Over Gold. Must have been a big one.
It was an 8-month trek, according to the material. It wrapped up with 2 final concerts at London's Hammersmith Odeon in July 1983.
And did the live lineup change again for this tour, given the more complex music?
It expanded, yeah. To handle the more elaborate arrangements from Making Movies and Love Over Gold, they added saxophonist Mel Collins.
From King Crimson.
That's him. And session keyboardist Tommy Mandel joined as well. These additions were mainly to support Alan Clark's expanded role on keyboards, fleshing out all those layers live.
Those final 2 Hammersmith Odeon concerts. They were recorded, weren't they?
Yes, they were captured for the live album Alchemy Live.
A double album.
A double album, yeah, just excerpts from those 2 nights. The material makes a point of suggesting it was released without studio overdubs, aiming to capture the raw live energy of the band at that time.
How did Alchemy Live do?
Pretty well for a live record. It came out in March 1984 and reached the UK top 3. Strong showing.
Now, during this period, 1983, 1984, Mark Knopfler and maybe other members were also exploring side projects.
That's right. Knopfler in particular started focusing more seriously on film scores.
Ah, the soundtrack work.
Yeah. The material mentions the film producer David Putnam encouraging this interest. This led directly to the soundtrack for the film Local Hero.
Oh, Local Hero. That's a beloved film and soundtrack.
It really is. Released in April 1983, and the score even earned a BAFTA award nomination the following year.
Did other Dire Straits members contribute to that soundtrack?
They did. Alan Clark played significantly on it, and John Illsley, Hal Linz, and Terry Williams all contributed to one track, Freeway Flyer. Also, Jerry Rafferty sang lead vocals on the song The Way It Always Starts.
And the main theme from Local Hero.
Going Home, theme of the Local Hero.
Yeah.
Played during the film's credits, it became incredibly popular, released as a single. It got strongly associated with Newcastle United Football Club.
Right, you hear it at football grounds.
Exactly. And it became a regular live staple for Dire Straits themselves from 1983 onwards. A really enduring piece of music.
Knopfler did other scores around then, too.
Yes, the material mentions scores for Cal in 1984, which John Illsley and Terry Williams also contributed to, and Comfort and Joy, which also featured Williams.
He was busy outside the band, too, producing other artists.
He was, producing records for Bob Dylan, his Infidels album, which also featured Alan Clark on keyboards.
Ah, returning the favor to Dylan.
Seems like it.
Yeah.
He also produced albums for Aztec Camera and Willie DeVille during this time.
And John Illsley released a solo album.
His first one, yeah. Never Told a Soul came out in 1984. It featured contributions from Knopfler, Alan Clark, and Terry Williams. So a real Dire Straits family affair almost.
And one more side thing mentioned, Knopfler playing with Brian Ferry.
Yeah, just a guest spot. He contributed lead guitar to a track on Brian Ferry's album Boys and Girls. It came out in June 1985. So yeah, they were all creatively very active outside the main band during this period, exploring different avenues.
All this activity, the evolving sound, the growing success, it really set the stage for what would be their absolute commercial peak, didn't it? An album that took them to just stratospheric levels of global fame.
Yes, absolutely. At the end of 1984, they regrouped and returned to the studio. This time, they headed to George Martin's AR Studios down in Montserrat.
The famous Air Montserrat to record.
The album Brothers in Arms, Mark Knopfler co-produced it with engineer Neil Dorsman.
And this album also saw some more personnel shifts during the recording process itself.
It did. Guy Fletcher joined the band full-time as a second keyboardist. He'd worked with Knopfler on some of the soundtracks, so he was already kind of in the circle.
Okay, another keyboard layer added.
Yeah. Guitarist Hal Lentz, who had joined for making movies, left early in the Brothers in Arms sessions. He was replaced in December 1984 by Jack Sonny, described as a long-standing friend of Knopfler's, though the material notes his actual contribution to the album recording was minimal.
Right, and then there's the whole drumming situation on Brothers in Arms. This seems to be quite a well-documented and discussed part of the story. The material goes into some detail here.
It does, yeah, and it offers insights from different perspectives, which is interesting. According to the co-producer, Neil Dorsman, Terry Williams' drumming style, during the first month or so of sessions in Montserrat, wasn't quite fitting the desired sound or feel that we're going for on the album.
So Terry Williams, who had replaced Pick Withers, was temporarily let go from the studio sessions?
That seems to be the case, yeah. He was released from the sessions, and they brought in a top jazz session drummer named Omar Hakim.
Omar Hakim, right. Big name.
Huge name. Hakim then apparently re-recorded the drum parts for most of the album in just 3 days, incredibly, before he had to leave for other commitments.
So both Omar Hakim and Terry Williams are credited on the final album sleeve.
They are, yes. Which has maybe led to some confusion over the years about who played what.
But the material clarifies Terry Williams did contribute to the final recording. He wasn't entirely replaced.
No, he wasn't entirely absent from the final product. The material includes more specific details attributed to Dorsman. He stated that Williams's main contributions that made it onto the finished album were the improvised drum crescendo at the very beginning of Money for Nothing.
That iconic opening fill.
That's the one. And the drums on the more straightforward rockabilly track, Walk of Life. Dorsman clarified further, saying Williams played the toms and tom fills throughout both of those songs, Money for Nothing and Walk of Life, while Omar Hakim played the main drum kit parts on all the remaining tracks on the album.
Right, that's quite specific. And do we get Terry Williams's perspective on this situation?
We do. Williams recalled recording to a click track, which he felt, constrained his natural rhythmic feel and groove. He said that about 6 weeks into the sessions, he expressed his disappointment about this to Knopfler after hearing some playback. And shortly after that conversation, he was dismissed from the sessions.
A difficult situation, clearly. But despite this issue in the studio, Terry Williams came back for the tour.
Yes, he rejoined the band for the music videos associated with the album and was firmly back in the drummer's seat for the absolutely colossal world tour that followed.
Okay, so Brothers in Arms, the album is released in May 1985. And its success was, well, just astounding, wasn't it?
Phenomenal is probably the only word for it. In the UK, it debuted at #1 and spent an incredible 228 weeks on the charts in total.
228 weeks. That's over 4 years.
It is. It became the best-selling album of 1985 in the UK. Sold over 4 million copies there alone.
And the numbers in the US?
Just as big.
Immense. It hit #1 on the Billboard 200 and stayed there for 9 consecutive weeks. It went multi-platinum, selling 9 million copies in the US.
9 million in the US.
And in Australia, it spent a remarkable 34 weeks at #1 on their ARIA charts. That was a record that held for decades. Just unbelievable dominance.
The album itself, musically, it had a more polished, maybe more 80s production sound compared to their earlier records, more lavish.
Definitely more lavish production, yeah. A bigger overall sound than their earlier work. And it generated a string of absolutely massive hit singles all around the world.
Let's run through those hits.
Okay, Money for Nothing, global phenomenon, reached #1 on the US Billboard Hot 100, #4 in the UK, instantly recognizable.
Totally.
So far away. That went top 20 in both the UK and US. The title track, Brothers in Arms, hit number 16 in the UK. A very moving song.
Walk of Life.
Yeah.
That was huge. Reached number 2 in the UK, number 7 in the US. Very upbeat, catchy.
Yeah, almost a contrast to some of the other tracks.
It was. And your latest trick, with that iconic saxophone intro, reached number 26 in the UK. These singles just kept the album selling and selling everywhere.
And the music video for Money for Nothing,
Mm.
that was groundbreaking in itself, wasn't it? With the computer animation.
Absolutely groundbreaking for its time, and famously, it was the very first video ever played on MTV Europe when the channel launched.
Wow. And it featured guest vocals from Sting?
It did. The material clarifies his co-writing credit, though.
Right.
It was apparently due to the incorporation of the melody line from the Police's song, Don't Stand So Close to Me.
The I Want My MTV line sung to that melody.
Exactly. Not because Sting actually contributed any lyrics, but yeah, that song and video won a ton of awards, Grammys, MTV Video Music Awards. It was everywhere.
Now, the material mentions a common belief, or maybe a claim, that Brothers in Arms was the first entirely digitally recorded album. Is that accurate?
It does note that claim, yeah.
Yeah.
But it also clarifies that, actually, earlier commercial all-digital recordings did exist before this album.
Okay, so not the absolute first.
Not the very first, despite the popular belief. But it was certainly an early adopter of digital recording technology, and the clarity of the sound definitely benefited from it. It played a huge role in showcasing what digital could do.
And the title track, Brothers in Arms, that song holds quite significant meaning, doesn't it? Particularly tied to world events at the time.
It does. The material states it was written during the 1982 Falklands War, and its lyrics address the senselessness and tragedy of conflict.
A very powerful theme.
Incredibly powerful. It's a song that has resonated very deeply over the years. Mark Knopfler even re-recorded a version in 2007 specifically for Falklands veterans. And the song is apparently often used at military funerals. It carries a lot of weight.
And beyond the music itself, the album played a really key role in the rise of a whole new music format, didn't it?
Yes, absolutely pivotal. Brothers in Arms is credited in the Guinness Book of World Records as the first CD compact disc to sell 1 million copies.
The first million-selling CD ever.
That's the claim. And because of that, and just its massive popularity, it's widely seen as being instrumental in popularizing the CD format itself. People bought CD players just to listen to this album with that new digital clarity.
That's incredible influence.
It really is. The Guardian newspaper even listed the Brothers in Arms CD release at number 38 in their ranking of key events in rock history. It was the perfect album at the perfect moment for the nascent CD technology to take off.
Did the CD version differ from the vinyl LP version at all?
Yes, slightly. The material notes, the CD featured the full-length version of Money for Nothing. The LP version was slightly edited, and the CD also had extended versions of all the other tracks that were on the first side of the LP, with the exception of Walk of Life.
Speaking of Walk of Life, there's a story that song nearly didn't make it onto the album at all.
That's right. Apparently, co-producer Neil Dorfman voted against including it. Didn't think it fit the mood of the rest of the record, perhaps.
But the band wanted it on there.
Seems the band members overruled him. And what happened? It became their most commercially successful single in the UK, peaking at number 2.
Just goes to show, doesn't it? Sometimes the artist's instinct wins out.
Absolutely. Trust the band.
So following this absolutely monumental album success came the Brothers in Arms World Tour. I imagine this was on an unprecedented scale for them.
Oh, completely. It was phenomenal. The stats are incredible. Over 2.5 million tickets sold.
2.5 million.
Yeah. Across Europe, Israel, North America, Australia, and New Zealand, they played a total of 248 shows in over 100 cities. Just massive.
And the touring lineup expanded again.
Yes, saxophonist Chris White joined the touring lineup for this trek, adding another layer to the live sound.
A major highlight of that period must have been their performance at Live Aid.
Absolutely, a defining moment. They were actually in the middle of a 13-night residency at London's Wembley Arena at the time.
13 nights at Wembley Arena.
Incredible, right? But on July 13th, 1985, they famously shifted over to the much bigger Wembley Stadium next door to play their set at Live Aid.
And their performance included Money for Nothing, with Sting joining them.
Yeah, Sting came out and sang his I Want My MTV part live with them on stage.
Yeah.
John Ilsley is quoted in the material describing the whole Live Aid experience as a very special feeling, a unique privilege, and just a fabulous memory, you can imagine.
Must have been incredible. Where did the tour finally wrap up?
It ended down under in Australia on April 26, 1986 at the Sydney Entertainment Centre.
And they set some records there too, didn't they?
They did. They played 21 consecutive nights at that venue in Sydney. Apparently, that record still stands today.
21 nights in one venue.
Unbelievable. And their overall Australasian tour, Australia, New Zealand combined, sold 900,000 tickets. That made it the biggest concert tour in Australasian music history at the time. A record it held until Ed Sheeran toured years later. Just shows the scale.
There's also a mention in the material connecting the album or the tour to famine relief efforts.
Yes. There was a group that undertook a fundraising journey called the Walk of Life,
Yeah.
inspired by the song title, traveling from London to Khartoum in Sudan in 1985 to raise awareness and funds for famine relief.
Okay.
And Dire Straits apparently donated one of their brothers in arms gold discs to the participants to acknowledge their efforts. Nice gesture.
Was any part of this massive tour filmed or televised?
Yes, part of one of the Wembley Arena concerts from July 10, 1985, was partially broadcast on the UK's Channel 4 music show The Tube in January 1986.
Did it feature any guests?
It did.
Huh.
Apparently, Nils Lofgren from Springsteen's band guested on Solid Rock, and the legendary Hank Marvin from The Shadows joined them for the closing number, Going Home.
Hank Marvin joining Mark Knopfler, two guitar heroes together.
Must have been quite a moment for guitar fans.
And the awards kept coming in even after the tour concluded.
They did. More Grammys followed, including one for Best Engineered Recording for the album itself and another for Best Music Video for the title track, Brothers in Arms. They also won Best British Album at the 1987 Brit Awards. The album just consistently appears high on lists of great albums, best-selling albums ever. Its legacy is huge.
And as a final symbol of their global reach at that point, the material notes that MTV Europe actually launched with.
Dire Straits' Money for Nothing video. In August 1986. The first thing shown on the new Pan-European music channel.
Incredible. So after all that, the massive success, the relentless two-year tour, the intense global spotlight, it's perhaps not surprising that the band needed a break, right?
Absolutely not surprising. And this led to their first significant period of inactivity as a unit. The first breakup, essentially.
Mark Knopfler specifically took time off from Dire Straits after the tour ended.
Yes, the material says he focused on his solo projects and continued his film soundtrack work throughout 1987. Basically put Dire Straits on hold.
But they did reunite for one very significant performance during that break.
They did. They regrouped to headline the huge Nelson Mandela 70th birthday tribute concert held at Wembley Stadium on June 11th, 1988, a major global event.
Was the lineup the same as the tour?
Not quite. There was a change. Guitarist Jack Sani couldn't participate because apparently his twin daughters were being born right around then.
Understandable abscess. Who filled in?
None other than Eric Clapton. He stepped in to play rhythm guitar with them for the set. And he even performed his own classic song Wonderful Tonight with them during their performance.
Clapton playing with Dire Straits. Another major collaboration.
Yeah. But shortly after that Mandela tribute show, there were official departures from the band.
Who left?
Jack Sani, who had missed the show anyway, and drummer Terry Williams both officially left the band shortly afterwards.
Okay. And then in September 1988, Mark Knopfler made it official. He announced the band was dissolving.
Yes. We have a quote here attributed to him from an interview with Rolling Stone magazine around that time. He said that with the press constantly calling them the biggest band in the world, the focus wasn't really on the music anymore. It was just on the popularity.
The fame became overwhelming.
Exactly. He said he simply needed a rest. This really highlights the immense pressure and, frankly, the exhaustion that must have come with that level of global fame and nonstop activity for years on end.
Understandable. Did anything get released during this hiatus?
Yes, a greatest hits collection, logically titled Money for Nothing, came out in October 1988. And it promptly hit #1 in the UK.
Still popular even when inactive.
Absolutely. Their very first hit, Sultans of Swing, was even re-released as a single in the UK to promote the compilation. John Illsley also released his second solo album, Glass, in 1988, which featured contributions from Knopfler, Alan Clark, Guy Fletcher, and Chris White. So connections remained.
And Alan Clark was playing with Clapton.
Yeah, the material mentions Alan Clark joined Eric Clapton's band for about 3 years during this period. And Mark Knopfler also briefly joined Clapton's band, too, for a time.
Interesting overlap there. Was there one more performance before they eventually reformed?
There was one more notable one-off show. In May 1989, they played a charity concert for an 11-year-old girl named Joanne Gillespie at the Mayfair Ballroom in Newcastle.
Back in Knopfler's home territory.
Right. Raised over £35,000 for her. The material notes this was Kerry Williams' final appearance as the drummer for the band, and guitarist Brendan Croker played rhythm guitar instead of Jack Sani for that show.
So Dire Straits is officially on ice. What was Mark Knopfler doing musically during this late 80s period?
He was actively pursuing other musical interests, particularly exploring his roots in country and folk music more deeply.
Ah, yes. This led to the Notting Hillbillies project, didn't it?
Exactly. In May 1989, he formed this country-influenced band, apparently over a meal at a Notting Hill wine bar.
Who was in that band with him?
It included Guy Fletcher, who was already in Dire Straits, plus singer-guitarist Brendan Croker and Steve Phillips. And interestingly, their manager, Ed Bicknell, played drums.
The manager on drums. That's unusual.
It is. They released an album called Missing, presumed having a good time, had a minor hit single with Your Own Sweet Way. They toured throughout the rest of 1989 and even appeared on Saturday Night Live in the U.S.
So a proper band project, not just a one-off.
Yeah, and Knopfler's focus on country and roots music continued with a collaboration album with the legendary guitarist Chet Atkins. That album, Neck and Neck, came out in 1990.
But after this period of exploring different projects, there was a performance that seems to have reignited the idea of reforming Dire Straits itself.
That's what the material suggests. It points to their performance at the Nebworth Festival in June 1990, a big charity event.
Who played under the Dire Straits banner there?
It was Mark Knopfler, John Illsley, Alan Clark, and Guy Fletcher. So the core remaining members. And they were joined on stage by Eric Clapton and his band for their set.
Another Clapton collaboration. What did they play?
Their set included solid rock, Money for Nothing, and interestingly, a new song Mark Knopfler introduced as experimental called I Think I Love You Too Much. He apparently mentioned on stage he was unsure about recording it.
Did that song ever get recorded by Dire Straits?
Not by them, no. But the material points out that the song actually appeared on blues rock guitarist Jeff Healey's album Hell to Pay, also released in 1990. Knopfler must have given it to him.
Okay. And it was apparently after that Nebworth performance that the decision was made to properly get Dire Straits back together.
According to the material, yes. Mark Knopfler, John Illsley, and their manager Ed Bicknell decided after Nebworth to reform the band the following year.
So the reunion officially happened around 1990, leading into 1991. The core lineup performing was Knopfler, Illsley, Clark, and Fletcher.
That's right, with Ed Bicknell back as manager as well.
And for the studio album that followed, On Every Street, they brought in quite a few outside musicians again.
They did. A number of session players augmented the core four. Chris White, the saxophonist from the Brothers in Arms tour, was involved again. Plus, American steel guitar player Paul Franklin, percussionist Danny Cummings, and guitarist Phil Palmer.
And drumming, who handled that on the album?
Drumming duties were actually split between two legendary session drummers, Jeff Porcaro of Toto.
Wow, Jeff Porcaro.
And French drummer Manu Katché, known for his work with Peter Gabriel and Sting, so top-tier players.
On Every Street was released in September 1991. It was their sixth studio album, and as it turned out, their final one. How was it produced?
This time, it was produced jointly by Knopfler, Alan Clark, and Guy Fletcher, the keyboard players taking a production role alongside Mark.
And the reception for this comeback album, how did it compare to the phenomenon of Brothers in Arms?
Well, according to the material, the reception was definitely more muted. It received mixed reviews from critics, and it reached a significantly smaller audience overall compared to its massive predecessor.
Mixed reviews. Any specific descriptions?
One retrospective review noted here from the AllMusic Guide described it as underwhelming. So perhaps didn't capture the magic or the zeitgeist in the same way Brothers in Arms had.
But despite the mixed reviews and maybe not reaching those same dizzying heights, it still sold a lot of copies globally, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. By any normal standard, it was still a huge success. The material states it had sold 15 million copies worldwide by 2008.
15 million is still a massive number, just not the 30 million plus of Brothers in Arms.
Exactly. It's all relative at that level. And initially, it performed very well on the album charts internationally.
Where did it chart well?
It went straight to #1 in the UK album charts.
Yeah.
It also topped the charts in numerous European countries and Australia. It was particularly successful in France, where it achieved diamond certification.
But maybe not as strong in the US this time.
Correct. In the US, it peaked at #12 on the Billboard 200. Still very respectable, but a noticeable drop from the 9 weeks at #1 for Brothers in Arms.
And the singles from On Every Street, did they replicate the global success of the Brothers in Arms singles? Especially back home in the UK.
No, not really. The material points this out quite clearly. The first single, Calling Elvis, which had that distinctive video styled after the 1960s TV show Thunderbirds.
Yeah, I remember that video.
It entered the UK singles chart at number 21, which is okay, but then it quickly fell off the chart. It actually performed much better internationally, top 10 in Australia, New Zealand, and across Europe, and even hit number 1 in Italy, so patchy success.
What about the other singles, Heavy Fuel?
Heavy Fuel actually missed the UK top 50 altogether, but interestingly, it became their second song ever to reach number 1 on the US Billboard Mainstream Rock Tracks chart after Money for Nothing.
So it resonated with rock radio in the U.S.
Seems so. And it charted respectively in Canada, Belgium, Australia, and some other European countries. Just not a big pop hit.
The title track, On Every Street, how did that do?
That wasn't a UK hit either. Failed to reach the top 40, though it did make the top 25 in France.
And the final UK single
Was a track called The Bug that reached the top 25 in Canada. And it featured backing vocals from the American country star Vince Gill.
Vince Gill, was he connected to the band?
Apparently, he was invited to join Dire Straits full-time around this period, but he declined the offer. Wanted to focus on his own successful solo career.
Wow, interesting what if. Was there another single released elsewhere?
Yes, a song called You and Your Friend was released as a single in France and Germany, but not in the UK or US. So overall, the singles didn't have that massive crossover impact this time around.
Following the album release, Dire Straits embarked on another enormous world tour, didn't they?
They did, the On Every Street tour, with Chris Whitten, who had played with Paul McCartney, handling the drums for the tour.
How long did this tour last?
It ran for well over a year, lasting until October 1992. It was another huge undertaking. 300 shows played to an estimated 7.1 million ticket-buying fans. Still massive numbers.
How did this tour compare to the Brothers in Arms tour, not just in scale, but in terms of the impact and the experience for the band?
Well, the material describes the tour as being musically more elaborate, perhaps even more complex than the previous one. But maybe not as critically acclaimed or ultimately as commercially successful overall.
Okay.
But crucially, it's repeatedly described in the material using words like grueling and too much for the band members. It's stated quite explicitly that this tour directly led to the second, and this time final, breakup of Dire Straits.
Wow. So this tour was the breaking point. We get some quite powerful quotes in the material about the toll this tour took, don't we?
Yes, they really paint a picture. Bill Flanagan, writing for GQ magazine, is quoted saying the tour basically drove Dire Straits into the ground, and that when the tour was over, both Knopfler's marriage and his band were gone. A stark assessment.
That's heavy. What about from the band members themselves, John Illsley?
John Illsley reflected on it, saying personal relationships were in trouble and it put a terrible strain on everybody, emotionally and physically. We were changed by it. And he added, quite tellingly, neither of us wants to go back to those days.
A definitive statement. And the manager, Ed Bicknell.
Ed Bicknell was even more blunt, calling the last tour utter misery. He felt that whatever the zeitgeist was that we've been part of, it had passed. And the material notes that John Illsley agreed with that sentiment. These quotes really emphasize the immense human cost of operating at that relentless global scale for so long.
It paints a very clear picture of just sheer exhaustion and strain, doesn't it? Beyond just the music. So the final concert of that tour, that was effectively the end of Dire Straits as a performing band?
Yes, the final show was on October 9th, 1992, in Zaragoza, Spain. That was the last time Dire Straits performed live.
And after the tour finally ended, what was Mark Knopfler's reaction?
He expressed a strong desire to give up touring on that kind of massive scale altogether. He took significant time away from the music business to recover.
Was there a live album from this final tour?
Yes, a live album capturing the tour called On the Night was released in May 1993. The reception was apparently very mixed critically, but it still managed to reach the UK top 5, which is actually quite good for a live record these days.
And an EP was released from the tour as well.
Yeah, a 4-track EP called Encores. It was very successful in continental Europe, hitting number 1 on the singles charts in both France and Spain, although it only reached number 31 in the UK.
Their final official album release came a bit later, a collection of older recordings.
That's right, live at the BBC. It came out in June 1995. It features live tracks mostly from their earlier period, 1978 to 1981, so primarily featuring the original lineup. The material indicates this was likely a contractual release, fulfilling obligations to their label, Vertigo Records.
And it was around this time, 1995, that Mark Knopfler officially, though quietly, disbanded Dire Straits for good.
Yes. He was preparing to launch his first full-fledged solo album, Golden Heart. He's quoted again on his decision to finally end the band. He said he put the thing to bed because I wanted to get back to some kind of reality. Yeah. He called it self-protection, a survival thing, and described operating at that huge scale as dehumanizing. He also noted it took him about 2 years to properly recover from the whole experience, indicating the significant toll it had taken on both his creative life and his personal life.
So that really marked the definitive end of Dire Straits as a touring and recording entity. And Mark Knopfler launched his full-time solo career right after that.
He did. His first proper solo album, Golden Heart, came out in March 1996. And the material also notes that around this time, the entire Dire Straits back catalog was remastered by the renowned engineer Bob Ludwig and re-released on CD. This helped ensure the band's music remained readily available in the growing digital format.
Now, while the band was officially over, have there been any instances where the core members have actually played together since 1995?
Yes, a few brief, informal occasions are mentioned. We learned there was a short reunion for John Illsley's wedding celebration on June 19, 1999.
At his wedding.
Yeah. Knopfler, Illsley, Alan Clark, and Guy Fletcher apparently played about 5 songs together, including a cover of Chuck Berry's Nadine. And Ed Bicknell, the manager, sat in on drums again.
A nice personal moment. Any other times?
Yes. In July 2002, Mark Knopfler held 4 charity concerts under the banner Mark Knopfler and Friends. For these shows, he was joined by John Illsley, Guy Fletcher, percussionist Danny Cummings, and saxophonist Chris White, all Dire Straits alumni.
So almost a Dire Straits reunion for those shows.
Pretty close. Apparently, Brendan Croker from the Notting Hillbillies played the first half, doing their material, and then Illsley joined for what was described as a Dire Straits session in the second half. Jimmy Nail also provided backing vocals for one of Knopfler's solo songs, so more of a gathering of friends and past collaborators for charity.
A major compilation album came out in 2005, didn't it? One that bridged the band's work and Knopfler's solo career.
That's right. Private Investigations. Yeah. The Best of Dire Straits and Mark Knopfler, released in November 2005. It performed well commercially, reaching the UK Top 20.
What did it include?
It featured tracks from the band's catalog, plus selections from Knopfler's solo albums and his film soundtrack work. There were 2 editions, a single disc and a double disc version. The only previously unreleased track included was a song called All the Road Running, which was a duet with the great Emmylou Harris.
Okay. And also in 2005, there was an anniversary release for Brothers in Arms.
Yes, the 20th anniversary edition of Brothers in Arms was released.
Yeah.
And it actually won a Grammy Award, specifically for Best Surround Sound Album. Credit went to the engineers Chuck Ainlay and Bob Ludwig, and producers Ainlay and Knopfler.
But despite these occasional collaborations for charity or weddings and the ongoing compilation releases, Mark Knopfler's position on a full, proper Dire Straits reunion, it seems very clear and consistent from what we have here.
Extremely clear, yes. He has consistently shown absolutely no interest in reforming the band in any serious capacity. He's quoted directly saying he's not interested in getting all that stuff back together again.
Pretty unambiguous.
Very. He stated he would only potentially consider it for a charity. He acknowledges the past, saying he's glad I've experienced it all, but he prefers things the way they are now with his solo career. It's also noted that Guy Fletcher and Danny Cummings frequently collaborate with him on his solo work, so those musical relationships continue, just in a different, less demanding context.
And he's been quite open about the downsides of the immense fame they experienced.
Yes. In a 2007 interview cited here, he commented specifically that he didn't miss the global fame aspect at all, saying simply, it just got too big.
Did other members feel differently, John Illsley?
Well, there's a mention from October 2008 where John Illsley apparently expressed hope for a comeback tour. But Knopfler declined the idea, stating he was reluctant and, interestingly, adding that he wasn't even particularly a fan of Dire Straits' early hits anymore.
Wow, that's quite a statement from the main songwriter.
It is. Illsley acknowledged at the time that Knopfler was clearly happy and very successful pursuing his solo career. And keyboardist Guy Fletcher also confirmed Knopfler's lack of interest in a reunion on his own website around then. So the door seemed firmly closed from Knopfler's side.
Despite the band being inactive, their early history was officially commemorated in London a year later.
Yes. In December 2009, they received a PRS for Music Heritage Award. This was marked by installing a special plaque on the block of council flats in Deptford, South London, where the band originally formed and played their very first gig back in 1977. A nice recognition of their humble beginnings.
Now, some former members have kept the music alive by touring under different names, haven't they? Playing Dire Straits material.
That's right. In 2011, Alan Clark, Chris White, and guitarist Phil Palmer formed a band called the Straits, initially for a charity show at the Royal Albert Hall. They were joined by drummer Steve Ferrone, who's played with Tom Petty, among many others.
And since then,
Various lineups featuring former members, including John Illsley himself at times, Alan Clark, Phil Palmer, Danny Cummings, Mel Collins, Jack Sonny before his passing. Even original drummer Pick Withers has been involved and occasionally have toured under names like Dire Straits Legacy or Dire Straits Legends. They even released an album of new material called Three Chord Trick.
so the legacy continues in that form.
Yes, there's a mention of a 2018 U.S. tour by one of these legacy groups that featured Trevor Horn, the producer, surprisingly, on bass guitar, and Steve Ferrone back on drums.
And what about recent individual activities mentioned in the material?
Alan Clark released a solo piano album called Backstory in September 2021, revisiting some of the music he's been involved with. John Illsley published his autobiography titled My Life in Dire Straits in November 2021.
That must be an interesting read.
I imagine so. And sadly, as mentioned, guitarist Jack Sonny passed away in August 2023 at the age of 68.
And John Illsley himself recently reiterated the stance on a potential reunion quite clearly again.
Yes, very clearly. In a November 2023 interview referenced here, Illsley confirmed that neither he nor Mark Knopfler have any interest whatsoever in reforming Dire Straits, despite apparently having received huge financial offers to do so over the years.
Huge offers, but still no interest.
None. Illsley stated plainly that the band had simply reached the end of the road after that grueling 1992 tour. He also said, quite revealingly, that he was actually pretty happy when the band ended because he felt mentally, physically, and emotionally exhausted by the time they disbanded.
That really underlines the toll it took.
It does. He reflected that while they obviously enjoyed the success, it definitely came with significant stress and pressure.
And he echoed Mark Knopfler's feelings about the sheer scale of the operation becoming unmanageable.
Yes, Illsley quoted Knopfler directly as saying, "Success is great, but fame is something you don't really want." And Knopfler himself is quoted again on the scale issue, saying he had an absolute ball for as long as it lasted, until it got so big that I didn't know the names of all the roadies. He described how they had multiple identical stage sets leapfrogging each other across continents on tour. Just logistically enormous.
That powerfully illustrates the dehumanizing scale Knopfler spoke of earlier, running a giant corporation almost, not just a band.
Exactly. The machine became too big.
Dire Straits were eventually inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, weren't they?
They were, yes. Announced in December 2017 for the 2018 induction class. John Illsley expressed pleasure at the time that their work was being recognized. But he also noted, even then, Knopfler's apparent lack of enthusiasm for performing at the ceremony.
And did Knopfler attend the induction ceremony in 2018?
No, he did not. Only John Illsley, Alan Clark, and Guy Fletcher attended from the band. And the material notes something quite unusual. They were apparently the first act ever inducted into the Hall of Fame without anyone giving an induction speech for them and without performing any music themselves.
That's odd. A very low-key induction for such a huge band.
Very unusual, yeah. Perhaps reflecting Knopfler's distance from the band's legacy by that point.
Looking back over their entire career, though, their commercial success is just undeniable, isn't it? The numbers are staggering.
Absolutely staggering. Material summarizes them perfectly. One of the most popular and commercially successful British rock bands ever. One of the world's best-selling music artists, period. Estimated album sales are somewhere between 100 and 120 million worldwide.
100 to 120 million.
Including over 51 million certified album units sold. Just massive figures. And for anyone wanting to delve even deeper into their story, the material mentions a forthcoming feature-length documentary by musician and YouTuber Mary Spender called The Dire Straits Story, apparently set for release in April 2025. It features extensive interviews with John Illsley covering their entire career.
Okay, something for fans to look out for. So let's take a moment now to synthesize what we've really learned from this deep dive into the material you provided us. What are the key takeaways from the story of Dire Straits?
Well, I think first, we clearly see a band with genuinely humble beginnings. A collection of individuals from quite diverse backgrounds who found a unique sound. A sound rooted in American traditions like country and blues, but forged in London. And they deliberately charted a different course than the prevailing punk scene at the time.
Right, they weren't chasing trends, and their path to success wasn't overnight, but it accelerated rapidly after a crucial break.
Exactly. Started with that simple demo tape catching the ear of a radio DJ, Charlie Gillette. That led to a record deal and a remarkably rapid rise to international recognition with those first two albums.
And their sound wasn't static either, was it? It evolved significantly over their career.
Very much so. From the clean, stripped-down feel of the first two albums, they moved towards the more complex, longer, more atmospheric arrangements found on albums like Making Movies and Love Over Gold. They incorporated more keyboards, added additional musicians live, all to realize that extended musical vision Mark Knopfler seemed to be pursuing.
But the absolute defining moment, commercially at least, was Brothers in Arms. That album was more than just music, wasn't it?
It really was. It wasn't just a massive musical hit selling tens of millions. It had a tangible cultural impact by helping to popularize the brand new CD format. Becoming the first album to sell 1 million copies on CD is a huge milestone. It was a genuine global phenomena driven by those huge hit singles, that iconic MTV video, and that colossal world tour.
And this is where the central tension that runs right through the material becomes most apparent, doesn't it? The conflict between that incredible, immense success and the personal cost it clearly incurred for the band members.
Yes. The descriptions of the touring, especially the Brothers in Arms tour, and particularly the final On Every Street tour, really emphasize the absolutely grueling, relentless nature of operating at that stratospheric level.
The quotes from Ilsley, Knopfler, even their manager, they're very revealing about the strain.
They are. The material is quite clear that the stress, the physical and emotional exhaustion, the strain on personal relationships, and what Mark Knopfler explicitly described as the dehumanizing scale of the whole operation. These were significant factors leading directly to the band's dissolution, both the initial break in 1988 and the final permanent one around 1995.
And that really explains why, despite the passage of time, the legacy, and presumably substantial financial offers for a reunion, it seems highly unlikely ever to happen.
It does. The members, particularly Mark Knopfler and John Ilsley, are quoted repeatedly reflecting on the negative impact of that scale of fame and touring. They seem to have found contentment in their subsequent lower-key careers and feel that the Dire Straits' journey had simply reached its natural, albeit exhausting, conclusion. They were fundamentally changed by the experience.
What's particularly striking, reading through all this, is that narrative arc. The band was almost consumed by the very magnitude of its own success. The machine they built to amplify their music became so enormous that it ultimately contributed directly to the decision to switch it off.
It's a powerful example, isn't it, of how too big can genuinely become too much for the individuals at the center of it all.
So, thinking about the Dire Straits story we've explored today, based entirely on the material you've shared with us, you've seen the journey from a unique sound forged in small London venues, through global domination on an unbelievable scale, and finally to the quiet ending that followed.
It really leaves you with something to consider, doesn't it? Here you have a band that achieved virtually everything the music industry has to offer in terms of commercial success, awards, global reach, fame beyond measure.
Absolutely. Top of the mountain.
And yet, the insights from the material strongly suggest that reaching that pinnacle wasn't the ultimate reward they might have imagined. Instead, it was an experience that led to profound exhaustion, personal cost, and ultimately a desire to step away completely from the intense spotlight and the massive machinery that came with it.
Perhaps the thought to take away from this deep dive, then, is something about that relationship between creativity and scale. When creative success grows to an immense global level, like Dire Straits experienced, can the original passion for just making music survive the relentless demands of the massive enterprise it inevitably creates?
Or does the sheer size of the machine, the touring, the promotion, the pressure, the loss of anonymity, inevitably change the fundamental relationship the artist has with their art, and perhaps more importantly, with their own well-being?
Something to ponder about the complex, maybe even perilous trade-offs faced by artists who reach the very, very top of their profession.
Indeed.
It's been absolutely fascinating unpacking the story of Dire Straits with you today, drawing directly from all the material you provided. Thank you for sharing it with us.
We hope this deep dive has offered you a comprehensive and insightful look into their incredible and ultimately very challenging journey through fame and music.
Until the next deep dive.